This audiobook gives you a clear, realistic way to protect your memory and mental clarity in midlife without turning your life into a health project. You will learn which everyday habits quietly weaken cognitive resilience, which ones reliably protect it, and how to work with them using a small, manageable amount of time. Most people assume that maintaining brain health requires extreme discipline, constant tracking, or radical lifestyle changes. Others avoid the topic altogether because it feels overwhelming or medical. Both approaches miss the real leverage points. What actually matters is not intensity, but structure. Research consistently shows that a handful of daily patterns, applied consistently, shape how the brain ages far more than complex protocols ever do. This book is built around that idea. Each chapter focuses on a small number of practical levers that fit into real adult life, work, family, fatigue included, and together form a simple daily framework for long-term cognitive resilience. Before any improvement is possible, the structure of what's happening needs to be understood. That's where we begin. Am I already losing it? You left your phone in the fridge last week. You walked into a room and completely forgot why you were there. You blanked on your neighbor's name, the one you've known for 3 years, and had to fake your way through the conversation. And then the thought hits you, the one you don't want to say out loud. Am I already losing it? If you're in your 40s or 50s and this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Nearly half of people in their 40s report noticeable memory lapses, and the first instinct is almost always fear. The mind jumps straight to Alzheimer's, dementia, cognitive decline, the slow unraveling of everything that makes you who you are. But here's what nobody tells you up front. There's a massive difference between normal forgetfulness and actual cognitive decline. Forgetting where you put your keys is normal. Not recognizing what keys are for is not. Walking into a room and forgetting your purpose is annoying, but common. Getting disoriented in your own neighborhood is a red flag. The line between these two realities is sharper than most people think. And understanding that line is the first step toward protecting yourself. Your brain in midlife is dealing with more than it ever has before. You're managing work deadlines, family obligations, financial stress, aging parents, and a constant stream of digital noise. Your attention is split in 20 directions at once. You're sleeping less, moving less, and your stress hormones are running higher than they should be. When you forget something under these conditions, it's not because your brain is dying. It's because your brain is exhausted. Think about the last time you couldn't remember where you parked your car. Were you distracted when you parked? Were you thinking about 3 other things? Were you checking your phone while walking into the building? That's not dementia. That's divided attention under chronic stress. Now think about this. If you couldn't recognize your car at all, if you wandered the parking lot genuinely confused about what you were looking for, that would be different. That's when the concern is real. Most people in midlife are experiencing the first scenario, not the second. But the fear of the second scenario is so overwhelming that every normal slip feels like a warning sign. And here's the part that should give you hope. Nearly half of dementia cases could be prevented or significantly delayed by addressing lifestyle factors. Not expensive treatments. Lifestyle. The way you move, sleep, eat, manage stress, and stay mentally engaged. Right now, there is no medication that can reliably prevent dementia. But there is overwhelming evidence that what you do in your 40s, 50s, and 60s shapes how your brain functions in your 70s and beyond. This audiobook will not ask you to live in a gym. It will not demand that you track every calorie, meditate for hours, or turn your life into a science experiment. What it will do is give you a small, proven set of daily habits that protect cognitive health without consuming your life. These are not extreme measures. They are structural adjustments, simple patterns that work with your real adult life, not against it. Before we go any further, take a moment and think about your typical day. Be honest. How many hours of sleep did you get last night? When was the last time you moved your body intentionally for 20 minutes? When did you last learn something genuinely new and challenging? How often do you feel genuinely connected to other people, not just scrolling past them online? These questions are not judgments. They are data points. And in the chapters ahead, we are going to take each one of these areas and show you exactly how to shift them, one small, sustainable change at a time. Because the brain you have at 70 depends on what you do today. And you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be consistent. Chapter 1. What's actually killing your memory and what isn't. Your brain at 45 is not a broken version of your brain at 25. It's a different tool entirely. And once you understand that difference, most of the fear starts to dissolve. When you were 18, your brain could process new information at lightning speed. You could cram for an exam the night before, memorize 20 random facts, and still have room left over for the phone numbers of 3 people you met at a party. That speed, that raw horsepower, peaked somewhere around age 18 or 19, according to research from MIT and Massachusetts General Hospital. Then it started its slow, steady decline. But speed isn't the whole story. Not even close. While your processing speed was dropping off, something else was building. Your ability to see patterns, make connections, understand context, apply past experience to new problems. Researchers call this crystallized intelligence, and it doesn't peak in your 20s. It keeps growing well into your 60s and 70s, sometimes beyond. Processing power versus wisdom. Speed versus accuracy. The brain doesn't break after 25. It shifts. You're not losing your mind when you can't remember a name as quickly as you used to. You're experiencing a normal trade-off. Your brain is prioritizing depth over speed, meaning over memorization. You might take longer to recall a specific fact, but when you do, you understand it in a way your younger self never could. The problem is that most people interpret this shift as damage. Every forgotten password, every missed appointment, every moment of walking into a room and forgetting why you went there feels like evidence that something is deeply wrong. It's not. It's your brain running on a different operating system, one that's optimized for synthesis and judgment rather than raw input speed. But there is a line, and it's important to know where that line is. Forgetting why you walked into a room is normal distraction. Forgetting where your bedroom is in your own house is not. Struggling to recall a neighbor's name under stress is frustrating, but common. Not recognizing your neighbor's face at all is a warning sign. The difference between normal aging and cognitive decline is not subtle once you know what to look for. Normal aging affects speed and access. Cognitive decline affects recognition and function. Most people in their 40s and 50s are dealing with the first, not the second. But the fear of the second is so overwhelming that every normal slip gets magnified into a crisis. So what actually raises your risk? What are the real threats to long-term cognitive health? The ones backed by decades of research rather than internet panic. Chronic stress is near the top of the list. Not the occasional bad day or the stressful week at work, but the kind of stress that never really goes away. The stress that keeps your cortisol levels elevated month after month, year after year. Studies from multiple research centers, including work published by the Centers for Disease Control, confirm that prolonged stress physically damages the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for forming new memories. Physical inactivity is another major factor. Your brain depends on blood flow, oxygen, nutrients. When you stop moving, circulation drops, inflammation rises, and the brain starts operating in a lower energy mode. Over time, that mode becomes the default. Poor sleep is devastating. During deep sleep, your brain clears out metabolic waste, consolidates memories, and repairs cellular damage. Skip that process night after night, and you're essentially running a system that never gets maintenance. The buildup is cumulative. Then there's the obvious stuff. Smoking, untreated high blood pressure, chronically elevated blood sugar, social isolation. Each of these individually increases dementia risk. Combine several of them, and the risk compounds. But even if you're dealing with multiple risk factors right now, you're not locked in. Lifestyle changes work. They work at 40, at 50, at 60, even at 70. Research published in journals like The Lancet and studies from institutions including Iowa State University show that adopting healthier patterns can cut dementia risk significantly, even in people who are already at higher risk due to genetics or family history. Which brings us to one of the most common fears, the one that keeps people up at night. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. My father was diagnosed at 60. Does that mean I'm next? Family history does increase risk. If you have a first-degree relative with dementia, your own risk goes up by about 70 to 75% compared to someone with no family history. That sounds catastrophic until you realize what it actually means. It means genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. A large study conducted by researchers at Iowa State University followed thousands of adults over several years and found that people with a family history of dementia who followed at least 3 healthy lifestyle behaviors, like regular exercise, not smoking, and maintaining a healthy diet, reduced their dementia risk by 25 to 35% compared to those with family history who followed 2 or fewer healthy behaviors. Even carrying the APOE epsilon 4 gene, one of the strongest genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's, doesn't guarantee anything. Recent trials show that people with this genetic variant still benefit significantly from lifestyle interventions. The gene raises baseline risk, but behavior still dictates outcome. Genetics matter, but they're not destiny. Another myth that won't die is the idea that it's too late to make changes after a certain age. That once you hit 40 or 50, the window for prevention has already closed. Multiple studies directly contradict this. Research published in peer-reviewed journals shows cognitive benefits from lifestyle changes, even in people who start making those changes in their 60s and 70s. The brain retains plasticity throughout life. It can still adapt, still build new connections, still strengthen existing pathways. The rate of change slows with age, but it never stops entirely. Starting earlier is better, but starting now is better than not starting at all. So what are the actual warning signs? The ones that should send you to a doctor rather than just making you anxious? Here are 7 signals your brain is struggling, not just adjusting. First, you're getting lost in familiar places, not occasionally losing track of which parking spot you used, but genuinely disoriented in your own neighborhood or unable to navigate a route you've driven 100 times. Second, you're having trouble with basic tasks you've done for years, forgetting how to operate your own coffee maker, struggling to follow a recipe you've made dozens of times. Third, you're repeating yourself constantly without realizing it, asking the same question multiple times in the same conversation, telling the same story 3 times in an hour and being surprised when someone points it out. Fourth, you're making increasingly poor decisions, not occasional lapses in judgment, but patterns of choices that are clearly out of character and potentially dangerous. Like giving large sums of money to strangers or ignoring urgent problems that would have alarmed you before. Fifth, you're withdrawing from activities you used to enjoy, not because you've lost interest, but because they've become confusing or overwhelming. Avoiding social gatherings because you can't follow conversations anymore. Stopping hobbies because the steps feel too complicated. Sixth, you're struggling with language in ways that go beyond forgetting a word. You can't find the right term at all, even simple ones. You substitute words that don't make sense. You lose the thread of what you're saying mid-sentence and can't get it back. Seventh, your personality is changing in noticeable ways. You're becoming more suspicious, more anxious, more easily upset, or emotionally flat in situations that would normally move you. These are not the same as normal forgetfulness. These are functional impairments. If you're experiencing any of these, it's worth talking to a doctor. Not to panic, but to get a baseline and rule out other causes like medication side effects, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid problems, or depression, all of which can mimic cognitive decline. For most people reading this, though, the reality is simpler. Your brain isn't broken. It's tired. It's under-resourced. It's trying to function in an environment that's chronically stressful, understimulated, overfed, underslept, and socially isolated. Change the environment, and the brain responds. You're not racing against an invisible deadline. You're building a foundation, and every choice you make today either strengthens that foundation or weakens it. Chapter 2. The minimum movement that protects your brain. You don't need to become an athlete. You don't need a gym membership, a trainer, or 60-minute morning runs before dawn. You need something simpler and more fundamental than that. You need to move your body in ways that keep blood flowing to your brain. And you need to do it consistently enough that your body remembers what it feels like to be used. Physical activity is one of the most powerful tools we have for reducing dementia risk, and the research on this is overwhelming. Study after study, across multiple decades and populations, shows the same pattern. People who move regularly have better cognitive outcomes than people who don't. The effect size is large, the mechanism is clear, and the dose required is far lower than most people think. When you move, especially when you move hard enough to elevate your heart rate, your brain gets flooded with benefits. Blood flow increases, delivering more oxygen and glucose to neurons that need it. Inflammation drops. Your body releases a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which acts like fertilizer for brain cells, promoting the growth of new neurons and strengthening connections between existing ones. Exercise also regulates blood sugar, reduces blood pressure, improves cholesterol levels, and lowers chronic stress hormones, all of which independently contribute to cognitive health. In other words, movement doesn't just protect your brain directly. It fixes the systems that would otherwise damage your brain over time. A large study published in JAMA Neurology in 2022 followed over 78,000 adults in the UK for several years, tracking their daily step counts and subsequent dementia diagnoses. The results were striking. People who walked around 9,800 steps per day had the lowest dementia risk. But even those who managed just 3,800 steps per day, a 20-minute walk, reduced their risk by 25% compared to those who barely moved at all. There was no magic threshold. More steps were better, but even modest increases mattered. And intensity mattered too. Steps taken at a faster pace, what the researchers called purposeful steps, had stronger protective effects than the same number of steps taken slowly. It means walking like you're slightly late for something is better than strolling. You don't need to hit 10,000 steps. You simply need to get your heart rate up for 20 to 30 minutes most days of the week. And you need to challenge your muscles a couple of times a week so they don't atrophy into decorative tissue. That's the prescription. That's the minimum effective dose. 20 to 25 minutes of brisk walking 5 or 6 days a week. Walk like you have somewhere to be. Your breathing should be noticeably faster. You should be able to talk, but not sing. If you're thinking that sounds too simple to matter, you're underestimating how far most people have drifted from baseline movement. The average American adult walks fewer than 4,000 steps per day. That's less than 2 miles. For many people in desk jobs, it's closer to 2,000. Your body was designed to move several miles a day, every day, just to function normally. When you don't, everything starts breaking down. Circulation slows. Insulin sensitivity drops. Muscle mass declines. Inflammation creeps up. And your brain, which depends on all of those systems, starts operating in a lower energy, lower capacity mode. Walking reverses that. Not all at once, but steadily. The second piece of the puzzle is resistance training. You need to challenge your muscles against some form of resistance at least twice a week. 15 to 20 minutes per session is enough if you're actually working, not just going through the motions. Why does this matter for your brain? Because muscle mass is metabolically active tissue. It regulates blood sugar. It produces signaling molecules that communicate with your brain. It supports balance and coordination, which reduce fall risk and keep you physically independent, which in turn keeps you socially and mentally engaged. Strength training also triggers the release of BDNF, just like aerobic exercise does. A study published in Frontiers in Neuroscience in 2025 found that even short bouts of resistance exercise increased BDNF levels in adults, with effects lasting several hours post-workout. You don't need a gym. You can do this at home with bodyweight exercises. Squats, push-ups, lunges, planks. Add resistance bands or a pair of light dumbbells if you want progression. The key is effort. You should feel your muscles working. You should finish each set feeling like you couldn't do many more reps with good form. 2 sessions a week, 15 to 20 minutes each. That's it. Now, if you're reading this and thinking there's no way you can carve out 45 minutes a day for exercise, you're not alone. Most people in their 40s and 50s are managing jobs, families, aging parents, financial stress, and a to-do list that never ends. The idea of adding structured workouts feels impossible. But movement doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to happen in a gym. It doesn't even have to happen all at once. Recent research on accumulated physical activity shows that breaking movement into short bursts throughout the day works just as well as doing it all in one block. A 10-minute walk in the morning, a 10-minute walk at lunch, and a brisk 5-minute walk after dinner has the same cardiovascular and metabolic benefits as a single 25-minute walk. Your brain doesn't care whether you moved for 30 minutes straight or in 3 10-minute chunks. It cares that you moved. So let's get practical. What does this actually look like for real people with real lives? If you work in an office, your default mode is sedentary. You sit in your car, you sit at your desk, you sit in meetings. By the end of the day, you've been upright and moving for maybe 30 minutes total. The fix doesn't require overhauling your entire life. It requires inserting movement into the gaps that already exist. Park at the far end of the lot. Take the stairs instead of the elevator, even if it's just for a few floors. Walk to a colleague's desk instead of emailing. Stand during phone calls. Set a timer to get up and move for 2 minutes every hour. Walk around the block at lunch, even if it's just for 10 minutes. At the end of the workday, before you go home, take a 15-minute walk. Not to clear your head, although those are nice side effects. Walk because your brain needs the blood flow, and your body needs the signal that it's still expected to function. Twice a week, do 15 minutes of bodyweight exercises at home. First thing in the morning, before your brain has time to negotiate. Squats, push-ups, lunges, planks. 4 exercises, 3 sets each, done with focus. You'll be done before your coffee is ready. If you work from home, the problem is different. You have more flexibility, but also more inertia. There's no commute to force you out of the house. The solution is to treat movement like a meeting. It goes on your calendar. It's non-negotiable. Walk first thing in the morning before you start work, even 10 minutes. This sets the tone for the day and signals to your body that movement is part of the routine, not an optional luxury. Take a real lunch break, not eating at your desk while checking emails. An actual break that includes going outside and moving. 15 to 20 minutes. Walk around the block, walk to a park, walk anywhere that isn't your house. At the end of the workday, do a closing walk. This creates a boundary between work and the rest of your life. It also prevents the afternoon brain fog that comes from sitting in the same chair for 8 hours straight. Twice a week, do resistance training at home. Same protocol as the office worker. 15 minutes, bodyweight exercises, done with effort. If you're dealing with chronic fatigue, whether from medical issues, stress, poor sleep, or just the accumulated weight of being an adult, the idea of adding exercise feels absurd. You're already exhausted. The last thing you need is more demands on your energy. But here's the paradox. Movement generates energy. It happens consistently over time. Sedentary people feel more tired than active people, even when they're resting more. Your body is stuck in a low-energy loop. It's not moving because it's tired, and it's tired because it's not moving. Breaking that loop requires a deliberate, sustainable nudge, not a heroic effort. Start with 5 minutes of walking. Not 25, not 10. 5. Walk around your house. Walk to the end of the block and back. Walk so slowly it feels ridiculous. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you moved. Do this once a day for a week. Then do it twice a day. Then extend one of those walks to 10 minutes. Then add a second 10-minute walk. Build gradually, week by week, until you're moving for 20 to 30 minutes total each day, broken into whatever chunks feel manageable. For resistance training, start with 1 exercise. Just 1. Squats, or wall push-ups, or chair stands. Do 1 set of 5 to 10 reps, twice a week. That's all. When that feels manageable, add a second exercise, then a third. Build the habit first, then build the intensity. The goal is not to exhaust yourself, but to teach your body that movement is safe, sustainable, and expected. Movement is not optional if you want to protect your brain. But it also doesn't have to look like what you think exercise is supposed to look like. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take over your life. It just has to happen. 20 to 25 minutes of walking most days. 2 short resistance sessions per week, broken into whatever chunks fit your life. That's the dose. That's what works. And it works because your brain is not a static object locked inside your skull. It's a dynamic system that responds to how you use your body. Treat your body like it's designed to move, and your brain benefits. Treat it like it's designed to sit, and your brain adapts to that too. Chapter 3. Food that doesn't steal your memory. You don't need to become a nutritionist. You don't need to track macros, weigh portions, or eliminate entire food groups. You need to understand a few basic principles about how food affects your brain, and then apply those principles consistently enough that they become automatic. Food matters for cognitive health because your brain runs on fuel. and the quality of that fuel determines how well the system performs over time. Bad fuel creates inflammation, damages blood vessels, destabilizes blood sugar, and accelerates aging. Good fuel does the opposite. It's not complicated, but it does require paying attention. The link between diet and dementia risk operates through several overlapping pathways. High sugar intake drives insulin resistance, which over time can lead to what researchers are now calling type 3 diabetes, a condition where the brain itself becomes resistant to insulin. When that happens, neurons can't take in glucose efficiently, which starves them of energy and makes them more vulnerable to damage. Chronic inflammation, driven by processed foods, excess sugar, and poor quality fats, damages blood vessels throughout the body, including the tiny vessels that supply the brain. When those vessels become stiff, leaky, or clogged, the brain gets less oxygen and fewer nutrients, and waste products that should be cleared out start accumulating instead. Vascular damage also increases the risk of small strokes and microbleeds, which silently destroy brain tissue over time. Many people with dementia have a combination of Alzheimer's pathology and vascular damage, and diet influences both. Weight matters too, but not in the simplistic way most people think. Excess body fat, especially around the abdomen, produces inflammatory chemicals that circulate through the bloodstream and reach the brain. Obesity in midlife is associated with higher dementia risk decades later, even after controlling for other factors. But the mechanism isn't just about being overweight. It's about metabolic dysfunction, chronic inflammation, and vascular damage, all of which are driven by the same dietary patterns that lead to weight gain in the first place. So what should you eat? The diets with the strongest evidence for cognitive protection are the Mediterranean diet and the MIND diet, which is essentially a hybrid of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, designed specifically for brain health. Both emphasize whole foods, vegetables, fruits, fish, nuts, olive oil, and whole grains. Both minimize red meat, processed foods, refined sugar, and fried foods. A meta-analysis published in early 2025 found that adherence to the Mediterranean diet was associated with an 11 to 30% reduction in the risk of cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. The protective effect was dose-dependent. The more closely people followed the diet, the lower their risk. Research from Harvard and Mass General Brigham, published in Nature Medicine in 2025, showed that the Mediterranean diet was particularly protective for people at high genetic risk for Alzheimer's, including those carrying 2 copies of the APOE4 gene variant. In other words, diet can offset genetic risk, not eliminate it, but significantly reduce it. The MIND diet showed similarly strong results. A study published in Nature in 2025 found that people who followed the MIND diet had slower cognitive decline and better preservation of brain structure over time. The diet's emphasis on leafy greens, berries, nuts, and fish appeared to provide particularly strong neuroprotective effects. You don't need to follow these diets perfectly. You don't need to eat Mediterranean food exclusively or give up everything you enjoy. You need to shift the balance so that most of what you eat comes from whole, minimally processed sources, and most of what you avoid is sugar, refined carbs, and industrial junk. 3 simple steps. That's it. Step 1. Cut back on sugar and sugary drinks. This is non-negotiable if you care about your brain. High sugar intake is directly linked to insulin resistance, inflammation, vascular damage, and cognitive decline. Sugary drinks in particular, soda, energy drinks, sweetened coffee beverages, are among the worst offenders because they deliver massive doses of sugar without any fiber or nutrients to slow absorption. Your blood sugar spikes. Over time, your cells stop responding to insulin as effectively, and you end up in a state of chronic metabolic dysfunction that damages your brain. You don't need to eliminate sugar entirely. You just need to stop consuming it in quantities that would have been unimaginable 50 years ago. The average American consumes over 70 pounds of added sugar per year. That's roughly 17 teaspoons per day. Most of it comes from processed foods and drinks, not from dessert. Start by cutting out sugary drinks entirely. Replace soda with water, sparkling water, or unsweetened tea. If you need caffeine, drink black coffee or add a small amount of milk, not syrup and whipped cream. Next, start reading labels. If sugar is in the top 3 ingredients, put it back. If a product has more than 10 grams of added sugar per serving, treat it as dessert, not food. You don't need to be perfect. You need to stop eating sugar multiple times a day, every day, as if it's a nutrient your body requires. Step 2. Add a brain portion to every meal. Instead of obsessing over what to eliminate, focus on what to include. Every time you eat, add something that actively supports brain health. A brain portion can be leafy greens, spinach, kale, arugula, mixed greens. A handful of berries, especially blueberries, which are rich in antioxidants that protect neurons. A serving of fatty fish like salmon, sardines, or mackerel, which provide omega-3 fats that support brain structure and function. A small handful of nuts, especially walnuts, almonds, or pistachios. A drizzle of olive oil on your vegetables or salad. At breakfast, add berries to your oatmeal or yogurt. Throw spinach into your eggs. Have a handful of walnuts with your coffee. At lunch, build your plate around vegetables. Add leafy greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, whatever you can get. Include a source of healthy fat, olive oil, avocado, nuts. If you're having a sandwich, add greens and skip the chips. At dinner, make half your plate vegetables. Include a source of omega-3s at least twice a week. Use olive oil instead of butter or margarine. Add herbs and spices, which are concentrated sources of anti-inflammatory compounds. For snacks, keep nuts, berries, and vegetables within reach. You're more likely to eat what's easy to access. If the only thing available is cookies, you'll eat cookies. If you have pre-cut vegetables, hummus, and a bag of almonds on your desk, you'll eat those instead. This approach works because it doesn't require you to give up anything immediately. It just requires you to add better options until the worse options naturally take up less space. Step 3. Stop eating late. When you eat matters almost as much as what you eat, especially for sleep quality, which we'll cover in the next chapter. Eating within 2 to 4 hours of bedtime disrupts both digestion and sleep. A randomized controlled trial published in 2025 found that people who ate dinner late, within 4 hours of bedtime, had 18% higher blood glucose levels, delayed sleep onset by an average of 26 minutes, and lower sleep efficiency compared to those who ate earlier. The meal was identical. The only difference was timing. Late eating forces your body to process food at a time when it's biologically programmed to be winding down. Your metabolism slows at night. Digestion becomes less efficient. Blood sugar stays elevated longer. And your sleep, which is critical for brain health, gets disrupted. The fix is simple. Finish eating at least 2 to 3 hours before bed. If you're going to bed at 10, eat dinner by 7 or 7:30. If you're hungry later, have a small, low-sugar snack, a handful of nuts, some berries, a piece of cheese. But keep it light. This one change improves sleep quality, stabilizes blood sugar, reduces nighttime inflammation, and gives your digestive system time to finish its work before you lie down. All of those benefits compound over time. Now let's make this practical. What does a brain-friendly day of eating actually look like for someone who's not interested in meal prep, calorie counting, or spending hours in the kitchen? Breakfast. Oatmeal with berries, walnuts, and a drizzle of honey. Or Greek yogurt with blueberries and almonds. Or scrambled eggs with spinach, tomatoes, and a slice of whole grain toast with olive oil. Coffee or tea, no sugar. Lunch. A large salad with mixed greens, cucumbers, tomatoes, chickpeas, grilled chicken or salmon, olive oil and lemon dressing. Or a whole grain wrap with hummus, vegetables, and a handful of nuts on the side. Or leftovers from dinner, built around vegetables and protein. Dinner. Grilled or baked fish with roasted vegetables, broccoli, carrots, bell peppers, and a side of quinoa or brown rice. Or a stir-fry with chicken, lots of vegetables, and a small portion of rice or noodles. Or a simple pasta with olive oil, garlic, spinach, tomatoes, and white beans. Snacks. A handful of almonds or walnuts, sliced vegetables with hummus, an apple with a bit of peanut butter, a small bowl of berries. None of this requires advanced cooking skills or exotic ingredients. It's basic, accessible food arranged in a way that prioritizes brain health. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to shift the average. If most of your meals look something like this, most days of the week, you're doing what the research says works. If you eat junk once in a while, it doesn't undo everything. The pattern matters more than the exceptions. Food is not a magic bullet. It won't prevent dementia on its own. But combined with movement, sleep, stress management, and mental engagement, it's one of the most powerful tools you have. Your brain is built from what you eat. Feed it well, and it works better. Feed it poorly, and it struggles. The choice, as always, is yours. Chapter 4. Sleep as your brain's nightly cleanup crew. Every night while you sleep, a maintenance crew goes to work inside your brain. They clear out waste, repair damage, consolidate memories, and reset systems that have been running all day. When you skip sleep or cut it short, that crew doesn't show up. The waste piles up. The repairs don't get made, and over time, the damage becomes permanent. This isn't a metaphor. It's biology. Your brain has a waste clearance system called the glymphatic system, discovered relatively recently by researchers at the University of Rochester. During deep sleep, this system becomes 10 times more active than it is during waking hours. Cerebrospinal fluid flows through channels around blood vessels, flushing out metabolic waste products that accumulate during the day, including 2 proteins that are directly linked to Alzheimer's disease: beta amyloid and tau. When you sleep well, these proteins get cleared out before they can clump together into the toxic plaques and tangles that damage neurons. When you don't sleep, they accumulate. Night after night of poor sleep means more buildup, less clearance, and a steadily increasing burden of toxic proteins in your brain. A study published in Nature in January 2026 found that a single night of sleep deprivation increased beta amyloid levels in the brain by approximately 5%. The increases were most pronounced in the hippocampus and thalamus, regions that are hit early and hard in Alzheimer's disease. Just one night. Imagine what happens after months or years of chronic sleep deprivation. Research from Washington University School of Medicine found similar results with tau protein. Mice that were kept awake for extended periods showed elevated tau levels. And over time, the tau began spreading through the brain in toxic tangles. When the mice were allowed to sleep normally, tau production dropped and clearance increased. Sleep wasn't just passive rest. It was active protection. The glymphatic system depends on deep, non-REM sleep to function properly. During deep sleep, brain cells actually shrink slightly, widening the spaces between them and allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow more freely. This is when the cleanup happens. When you spend the night in light, fragmented sleep, or when you stay awake scrolling on your phone until 1 in the morning, you're skipping the only time your brain has to take out the trash. And it's not just about protein clearance. Sleep is when your brain consolidates memories, moving information from short-term storage into long-term networks. Without adequate sleep, new memories don't stick. You learn less. You retain less. You feel like you're forgetting more, and you are, because the process that turns experience into memory isn't completing its cycle. Poor sleep also raises your risk for almost every other condition that increases dementia risk. Chronic sleep deprivation drives up blood pressure, destabilizes blood sugar, increases inflammation, and weakens the immune system. It makes you more likely to be sedentary because you're too tired to move. It makes you more likely to eat poorly because your hunger hormones are dysregulated. It raises cortisol and keeps your stress response in overdrive. All of that damages your brain, directly and indirectly. The Centers for Disease Control lists inadequate sleep as a modifiable risk factor for cognitive decline and dementia, right alongside physical inactivity and poor diet. The evidence is overwhelming. Sleep matters. Not getting enough of it, consistently over years, significantly raises your risk. So how much sleep do you actually need? 7 to 8 hours per night. Not 5. Not 6. 7 to 8. That's the range where cognitive function, metabolic health, and cardiovascular health are optimized. Some people can function reasonably well on 6 hours, but their brain health still suffers over the long term, even if they don't feel it in the moment. Consistency matters too. Going to bed and waking up at roughly the same time every day, even on weekends, stabilizes your circadian rhythm and improves sleep quality. Your body thrives on predictability. When your sleep schedule is erratic, your brain never fully adapts, and you spend every night fighting against your own biology. Most people know they're not sleeping enough. The problem is, they don't know how to fix it, or they've tried a few things that didn't work and given up. Sleep hygiene advice often feels overwhelming, a long list of rules that seem impossible to follow while managing a full life. So here's the simplified version. 4 rules. Pick 2 to start. Add the others when the first 2 become automatic. Rule 1. Manage light exposure. Your brain uses light to regulate your internal clock. Bright light in the morning signals that it's time to be awake and alert. Dim light in the evening signals that it's time to wind down. When you blast your eyes with blue light from screens late at night, you're telling your brain it's still daytime, which suppresses melatonin and delays sleep onset. The fix is straightforward. Get bright light exposure early in the day, ideally from sunlight. Even 10 minutes outside in the morning helps. In the evening, dim the lights. Use lamps instead of overhead lights. If you're going to use screens, turn on blue light filters or wear blue blocking glasses. Better yet, stop using screens an hour before bed. This doesn't require buying special equipment or overhauling your home. It just requires paying attention to when and how you're exposing yourself to light. Rule 2. Cut caffeine after noon. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. If you drink coffee at 3 in the afternoon, half of that caffeine is still in your system at 9 at night. Even if you don't feel wired, it's interfering with your ability to fall into deep sleep. Most people don't realize how much caffeine affects their sleep, and because the effect is subtle. You fall asleep eventually, but your sleep is lighter and more fragmented, and you wake up feeling less rested. Over time, that fragmentation adds up. If you need an afternoon pick-me-up, switch to decaf, herbal tea, or just water. Or better yet, take a 10-minute walk instead. Movement is a better energy boost than caffeine, and it doesn't wreck your sleep. Rule 3. Create a wind-down routine. Your brain doesn't have an on-off switch. You can't be answering work emails at 11:30 and expect to fall asleep peacefully at midnight. You need a buffer, a predictable sequence of low-stimulation activities that signal to your brain that sleep is coming. Your routine can be whatever works for you. Read a book, take a warm shower, do some light stretching, listen to calm music, write in a journal. The content matters less than the consistency. When you do the same things in the same order every night, your brain starts associating those activities with sleep, and the transition becomes easier. This doesn't need to take an hour. 20 to 30 minutes is enough. The goal is to downshift from the chaos of the day into a state where sleep feels like the natural next step, not an interruption. Rule 4. Keep your bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. Your core body temperature needs to drop slightly for you to fall asleep and stay asleep. A room that's too warm makes this difficult. The ideal temperature is somewhere between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. If you wake up hot or sweaty in the middle of the night, your room is too warm. Darkness matters because even small amounts of light can interfere with melatonin production. Use blackout curtains if street lights or early morning sun are a problem. Cover or remove any glowing devices. Your bedroom should be dark enough that you can't see your hand in front of your face. Quiet is harder to control, especially if you live in a noisy area. Earplugs work for some people. White noise machines or fans work for others. Experiment until you find what lets you sleep undisturbed. Now, there's one sleep issue that doesn't respond to hygiene improvements, and that's sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a condition where your airway repeatedly collapses during sleep, cutting off your oxygen supply and forcing your brain to wake you up just enough to start breathing again. You might not remember waking, but your sleep is fragmented into hundreds of tiny interruptions every night. The result is chronic sleep deprivation, even if you're in bed for 8 hours. Sleep apnea is incredibly common, especially in people over 40, and it's strongly linked to cognitive decline and dementia. The repeated drops in oxygen damage blood vessels in the brain, increase inflammation, and disrupt the glymphatic clearance that happens during deep sleep. Studies show that untreated sleep apnea can accelerate cognitive decline by years. If you snore loudly, gasp, or choke during sleep, wake up with headaches, or feel exhausted despite spending enough time in bed, talk to a doctor. Sleep apnea is treatable, usually with a CPAP machine that keeps your airway open at night. It's not comfortable at first, but it works, and the cognitive benefits are measurable. Sleep is not optional. It's not something you sacrifice to get more done or catch up on later. Every night you short yourself on sleep, you're skipping maintenance on the most important organ in your body. The effects are cumulative. You don't notice them immediately, but over years and decades, they add up to significant cognitive decline. So here's a simple experiment. 1 week, 7 nights. Nothing heroic, just an honest attempt to prioritize sleep and see what happens. Night 1. Set a bedtime alarm for 30 minutes before you want to be asleep. When it goes off, stop whatever you're doing and start your wind-down routine. Dim the lights. Put your phone on silent in another room. Read, stretch, or just sit quietly. Get in bed at your target time. Night 2. Same bedtime. Add a rule. No caffeine after noon. Notice whether you fall asleep faster or sleep more deeply. Night 3. Same bedtime, no caffeine. This time, get outside for at least 10 minutes of daylight in the morning. Doesn't matter what you're doing, just expose your eyes to natural light. Night 4. Keep the same routine. Tonight, make your bedroom cooler than usual. Open a window, turn down the heat, or use lighter blankets. Night 5. Same routine. Pay attention to how you feel during the day. Are you less foggy, more focused, less irritable? Write it down. Night 6. Keep going. By now, the routine should feel less forced. Your brain is starting to expect sleep at this time. Night 7. Same routine one more time. At the end of the week, assess. Did you sleep better? Did you feel better? Was it worth the effort? Most people who try this for a full week notice real improvements. They fall asleep faster, wake up less during the night. They feel more alert during the day. And once they feel the difference, it becomes easier to keep going. Sleep is not a luxury. It's the foundation. Without it, everything else you're doing to protect your brain, exercise, diet, stress management, becomes harder and less effective. Your brain needs that nightly cleanup crew. Let them do their job. Chapter 5. Building Cognitive Reserve. Without the marathon. Your brain has a backup plan. Multiple backup plans, actually. When one neural pathway gets damaged, it can reroute through another. The more pathways you've built over your lifetime, the more options your brain has when things start to break down. This capacity is called cognitive reserve, and it's one of the most important concepts in understanding why some people develop dementia and others don't, even when both have similar levels of brain damage. Two people can have the same amount of Alzheimer's pathology in their brains, the same plaques, the same tangles, the same level of tissue loss. But one person shows severe symptoms while the other continues functioning normally. The difference isn't in the amount of damage. It's in how much reserve the brain built up before the damage started. Cognitive reserve is like redundancy in a system. If you have one route to get to work and that road closes, you're stuck. If you have 5 different routes, you can adapt. Your brain works the same way. The more connections you've built, the more skills you've learned, the more varied your experiences, the more resilient your brain becomes. This concept explains why people with higher levels of education have lower rates of dementia, even though education doesn't directly protect against Alzheimer's pathology. It explains why people who stay mentally and socially active throughout their lives maintain cognitive function longer. It's not that they avoid brain damage. It's that their brains have enough backup capacity to keep functioning despite the damage. A large meta-analysis published in 2024 found that individuals with high cognitive reserve in late life had a 19% reduced incidence of dementia compared to those with low reserve. The protective effect was strongest for people who maintained cognitive activity and social connection throughout their lives, not just in youth. The key finding was this: cognitive reserve isn't fixed. It can be built at any age, and the activities that build it are accessible, practical, and sustainable. Every time you learn a new skill, your brain physically changes. Neurons that fire together wire together, forming new connections called synapses. The more you practice, the stronger those connections become. Eventually, myelin, a fatty substance that acts like insulation, wraps around the neural pathways you use most often, making signals travel faster and more efficiently. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it doesn't stop at age 25. Research published over the past 40 years has shattered the old belief that the adult brain is fixed and unchangeable. Your brain continues to adapt, restructure, and build new connections throughout your entire life, as long as you give it reasons to do so. When you're learning something challenging, something that requires focus and effort, your brain releases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which acts like fertilizer for neurons. BDNF promotes the growth of new neurons, strengthens existing connections, and protects against neurodegeneration. Exercise triggers BDNF release, but so does learning. The combination of both is even more powerful. The catch is that your brain only changes in response to novelty and challenge. If you do the same crossword puzzle every morning, you get better at crosswords. But that's all. The neural pathways involved in solving that specific type of puzzle get stronger, but nothing new gets built. You're not creating redundancy. You're just maintaining a narrow skill. What builds cognitive reserve is doing something unfamiliar, something difficult, something that forces your brain to recruit new regions and form new networks. That's why learning a language or a musical instrument has such strong protective effects. These activities require coordination across multiple brain systems: vision, hearing, motor control, memory, attention, and they force the brain to adapt in ways that crossword puzzles never will. Bilingualism is one of the most studied examples of cognitive reserve in action. People who speak 2 languages fluently show enhanced executive function, the ability to plan, focus, switch tasks, and inhibit irrelevant information. This advantage becomes stronger with age, meaning bilingual older adults outperform monolingual older adults on cognitive tests, even when both groups have similar levels of brain atrophy. A study published in 2017 found that elderly bilinguals showed a delay of about 4.5 years in the onset of dementia symptoms compared to age-matched monolinguals. 4.5 years. That's not a small effect. That's the difference between needing full-time care at 75 versus still living independently at nearly 80. The reason bilingualism is so protective is that managing 2 languages requires constant executive control. Every time a bilingual person speaks, their brain has to activate the correct language, suppress the other one, and monitor for errors. This happens automatically, thousands of times a day. And it strengthens the brain's executive control network, particularly regions like the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex. Research using brain imaging has shown that bilinguals have more gray matter in these executive control regions and more efficient neural processing. Their brains can do the same cognitive tasks with less effort, which means they have more capacity left over when things start to break down. And you don't need to be bilingual from childhood to see benefits. Adults who start learning a second language in their 40s or 50s still show measurable improvements in cognitive function and brain structure. The effects are smaller than they would be if you'd been bilingual since birth, but they're real. You're building new pathways. You're training executive control. You're creating reserve. Musical training works similarly. Learning to play an instrument requires you to read notation, coordinate both hands, maintain rhythm, listen for pitch, and integrate all of that into a coherent performance. It's one of the most cognitively demanding activities humans do, and the brain adapts by reorganizing itself. Research from Baycrest's Rotman Research Institute in 2018 found that musicians showed more efficient brain activity when performing cognitive tasks. They activated different networks, used fewer resources, and performed better than non-musicians. A study published in February 2026 found that even childhood music lessons, taken decades earlier, were associated with better cognitive function in older adults. The protective effect persisted across the lifespan. Adults who start learning music in midlife also benefit. A small study found that after just 6 months of piano lessons, older adults showed improvements in memory, attention, and processing speed. The changes were measurable on cognitive tests and visible in brain scans. You don't need to become a concert pianist. You need to practice consistently, struggle with difficult passages, and keep pushing yourself to improve. That struggle is what drives neuroplasticity. The social brain and why connection protects you. Humans are social animals. Our brains evolved to navigate complex social environments, and maintaining those skills requires constant cognitive work. When you have a conversation, your brain is doing an enormous amount of processing. You're tracking what the other person is saying, interpreting tone and body language, accessing relevant memories, formulating responses, inhibiting irrelevant thoughts, and adjusting your behavior in real time. All of that exercises your brain in ways that solitary activities don't. Social interaction engages multiple cognitive domains simultaneously: memory, attention, language, executive function. And it triggers the release of neurochemicals like dopamine and oxytocin, which reinforce social bonds and motivate continued engagement. A narrative review published in 2023 found that loneliness and social isolation are associated with reduced cognitive function across multiple domains and a heightened risk of dementia. The effect size was comparable to smoking or physical inactivity. Social isolation isn't just bad for your mood. It's actively damaging to your brain. The mechanism is partly psychological. Loneliness increases stress, which raises cortisol, which damages the hippocampus. But it's also structural. When you stop engaging socially, you stop using the neural networks that support social cognition, and those networks atrophy from disuse. Research on dopamine and oxytocin interactions in social behavior, published in early 2025, found that these neurochemicals work together to reinforce social connections and motivate social engagement. When you have a positive social interaction, your brain releases dopamine, which signals reward and makes you more likely to seek out similar interactions in the future. Oxytocin enhances trust and emotional bonding, which deepens relationships over time. Chronic social isolation disrupts this system. Animal studies show that socially isolated mice have impaired dopamine signaling and reduced oxytocin receptor expression. They show less interest in social interaction and more difficulty recognizing familiar individuals. The same patterns appear in humans. Prolonged loneliness changes brain structure and function in ways that make it harder to connect, which creates a vicious cycle. Breaking that cycle requires deliberate effort, especially in midlife, when social networks often shrink due to job changes, moves, kids leaving home, or the deaths of parents and friends. You have to actively create opportunities for real connection, not just surface-level interaction. Most people hear this advice and think they need to overhaul their entire lives. Learn Mandarin. Pick up the violin. Join 3 clubs. Become a social butterfly. That's not realistic, and it's not necessary. Building cognitive reserve doesn't require grand transformations. It requires small, consistent challenges that push your brain just outside its comfort zone. 15 to 20 minutes a day is enough if you're doing something genuinely new and staying consistent. The key is novelty and effort. If an activity feels easy, automatic, or repetitive, it's not building reserve. It's maintaining what you already have. You need something that makes you think, that occasionally frustrates you, that requires you to learn rather than just perform. So what does this look like in practice? Let's get specific. Learning a language. You don't need to become fluent. You need to spend 15 minutes a day working through lessons on an app like Duolingo, Babbel, or Rosetta Stone. Practice pronunciation. Learn vocabulary. Make mistakes and correct them. The struggle is the point. That's when your brain is building new pathways. If you already speak a second language but haven't used it in years, start using it again. Watch shows in that language, read articles, have conversations with native speakers online. Reactivating dormant skills is easier than starting from scratch, and it still builds reserve. Learning a musical instrument. Again, you don't need to perform. You need to practice. 10 to 15 minutes a day, learning to read music, coordinating your hands, training your ear. Piano and guitar are popular choices because they're accessible and there are endless free resources online. But any instrument works. Ukulele, harmonica, even a simple recorder. If you played an instrument as a child, picking it back up in midlife is easier than starting fresh. Your brain still has some of those neural pathways, even if they're weak from disuse. You're not starting from zero. You're rebuilding, learning to dance, salsa, ballroom, line dancing, swing, tango, whatever interests you. Dancing combines physical coordination, memory, rhythm, spatial awareness, and social interaction. It's one of the most cognitively demanding activities you can do, and it's also fun, which makes it sustainable. Most cities have beginner dance classes for adults. You don't need a partner. You don't need to be coordinated. You just need to show up, follow instructions, and tolerate feeling awkward for a few weeks. By the third or fourth class, it starts to click. Learning new technology, not just using apps the way they're designed, but actually figuring out how they work. Learning to edit videos on your phone. Learning to use spreadsheets for a project. Learning the basics of coding through free platforms like Codecademy or Khan Academy. Technology is constantly evolving, which means there's always something new to learn. And unlike languages or instruments, technology skills often have immediate practical applications, which makes them easier to stick with. Taking up a craft, woodworking, knitting, painting, pottery, quilting. These activities require planning, fine motor control, spatial reasoning, and sustained attention. They're meditative, but also cognitively demanding. And at the end, you have something tangible to show for your effort, which reinforces the habit. Woodworking, for example, requires you to measure precisely, visualize three-dimensional objects, plan sequences of cuts, and problem-solve when things don't fit. Knitting requires you to count stitches, follow complex patterns, and coordinate both hands. Both activities force your brain into unfamiliar territory. Reading challenging material. Not just whatever you normally read, but something outside your comfort zone. Nonfiction on unfamiliar topics, classic literature, philosophy, science writing, anything that requires you to slow down, think, and engage deeply. The act of reading itself is protective. A study from 2014 found that people who read regularly throughout their lives had better cognitive function in old age than those who didn't. But challenging reading is more effective than easy reading because it forces your brain to work harder. Set a goal: one challenging book per month, or one long-form essay per week. Make notes, look up unfamiliar words, think through the arguments. This isn't passive entertainment. It's active mental exercise. Playing strategy games, chess, Go, bridge, complex board games like Settlers of Catan or Ticket to Ride. These games force you to plan ahead, consider multiple possibilities, predict your opponent's moves, and adapt to changing conditions. They're structured challenges that build cognitive flexibility. If you don't have people to play with in person, there are online platforms where you can play against opponents from around the world. Chess.com, Board Game Arena. The competition keeps you engaged, and the difficulty scales with your skill level. Volunteering in ways that involve learning, teaching literacy, mentoring young professionals, organizing community events. Activities where you're solving problems, interacting with people, and learning new systems, not just performing routine tasks. Volunteering that involves teaching is particularly powerful, because teaching forces you to organize information clearly, anticipate questions, and adapt your explanations to different learners. All of that is cognitively demanding work. traveling, even locally. Exploring new places forces your brain to navigate unfamiliar environments, adapt to new situations, and process novel information. You don't need to fly to Europe. A new neighborhood in your own city works. Drive a different route. Walk through a park you've never visited. Go to a museum you've been meaning to check out. The key is novelty. When everything is familiar, your brain runs on autopilot. When things are unfamiliar, it has to pay attention, which is when learning happens. Having deep conversations. Not small talk, not surface-level exchanges, but real discussions where you're exploring ideas, listening carefully, and thinking through complex topics. This is cognitive work, and it builds reserve. Book clubs, discussion groups, long phone calls with friends where you're actually talking about things that matter. Even debates, as long as they're respectful. Any format that gets you thinking and articulating complex ideas. How to actually start and stick with it. Pick one. Just one. Don't try to add 5 new activities at once. Choose the one that feels most interesting or most accessible given your current life. Commit to 15 to 20 minutes per day or a few longer sessions per week if the activity doesn't fit into daily blocks. Do it consistently for 3 months. That's roughly how long it takes for a new behavior to become automatic. At that point, it's a habit, not a chore, and you can add something else if you want. Track your progress, but not obsessively. Keep a simple log. Practice Spanish for 15 minutes. Went to dance class. Played chess online for 20 minutes. Seeing the pattern of consistency is motivating. Seeing gaps helps you adjust. Expect to be bad at first. That's normal. If you pick up a guitar for the first time at age 48, it's going to sound terrible for weeks, maybe months. That frustration is a signal that your brain is working, adapting, building new pathways. The same goes for learning a language. You'll forget vocabulary. You'll feel ridiculous trying to pronounce unfamiliar sounds. That discomfort is growth. If it feels easy, you're not learning. You're just rehearsing. Find a way to make it social if possible. Take a class. Join a meetup group. Practice with a friend. Social accountability makes it easier to stick with challenging activities, and the social interaction itself adds cognitive benefits. But if you're an introvert or your schedule doesn't allow for group activities, solo practice still works. Millions of people have learned languages, instruments, and crafts entirely on their own using online resources. The key is consistency, not company. The second piece of cognitive reserve is social connection. And this one is harder to quantify because it's not about scheduling activities. It's about quality. You need real interactions. Conversations where you're actually present, engaged, and thinking. Not texting. Not liking posts. Talking. 2 to 3 meaningful interactions per week is enough. A phone call with a friend where you actually talk for 20 minutes, not just check in. A coffee with someone where you're discussing something that matters. A regular meetup with a group where you're participating, not just showing up. If you're naturally introverted or socially drained, this doesn't mean you need to become extroverted. It means you need to protect the social interactions that do energize you and make sure they're happening regularly. Quality over quantity. For some people, this means rekindling old friendships that faded due to distance or busy schedules. A text that says, "I've been thinking about you. Want to catch up?" can restart a relationship that's been dormant for years. For others, it means finding new social circles around shared interests. Join a book club. Take a class. Volunteer. Show up to the same coffee shop at the same time every week and become a regular. These small, repeated interactions can grow into real connections over time. The goal isn't to fill your calendar with social obligations. The goal is to make sure you're having regular conversations that require you to think, listen, and engage. Those conversations protect your brain just as much as learning a new language does. 10 brain projects for midlife, with real examples. Here's a practical list. Pick one. Start this week. Project 1. Learn conversational Spanish in 6 months. Use Duolingo for 15 minutes every morning. By month 3, add a weekly conversation practice session with a tutor on italki. By month 6, you'll be able to hold a basic conversation. Project 2. Learn to play 3 songs on the ukulele. Buy a cheap ukulele and follow free YouTube tutorials. Practice 10 minutes a day. Start with Riptide or I'm Yours. By week 8, you'll be able to play through a full song. Project 3. Take a beginner salsa class. Find a local studio that offers drop-in classes. Go every week for 3 months. By the end, you'll know the basic steps and be able to social dance at a party. Project 4. Read 1 challenging nonfiction book per month. Start with something you've always meant to read but thought would be too difficult. Sapiens. Thinking fast and slow. The Gene. Take notes. Look up unfamiliar terms. Discuss it with someone when you finish. Project 5. Learn basic woodworking. Start with a simple project like a cutting board or a small shelf. Watch instructional videos. Borrow or buy basic tools. Spend a few hours each weekend working on it. By the end, you'll have a functional object and a new skill. Project 6. Join a weekly book club or discussion group. Look for one at your local library, community center, or online through Meetup. Show up consistently. Participate actively. Let yourself be challenged by other people's perspectives. Project 7. Learn to edit videos on your phone. Pick a free app like CapCut or iMovie. Follow tutorials. Make a short video of a family event or a trip. Share it. The process of learning the software and thinking through how to structure the video is cognitively demanding work. Project 8. Take up knitting or crocheting. Buy supplies and follow beginner tutorials on YouTube. Start with a simple scarf. The repetitive motion is calming, but following patterns and counting stitches keeps your brain engaged. Project 9. Play chess online for 20 minutes 3 times a week. Create an account on chess.com. Start with beginner-level opponents. Work through the built-in puzzles and tutorials. Over time, your strategic thinking will improve, and you'll feel the cognitive challenge. Project 10. Volunteer to tutor or mentor. Contact a local literacy program, community college, or mentorship organization. Commit to a few hours per week. Teaching forces you to organize knowledge clearly and adapt to different learning styles, which is powerful cognitive work. Why this matters more than you think. Building cognitive reserve is not about becoming a different person. It's about adding small, challenging elements to your life that keep your brain flexible and resilient. You don't need to master anything. You just need to keep learning. The brain doesn't care whether you're good at the new skill. It cares that you're trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. That process, repeated over time, is what builds reserve. You have the rest of your life to add layers to this. Every new skill, every new challenge, every meaningful conversation adds to the buffer that protects you when damage inevitably starts accumulating. Start small. Stay consistent. Your brain will respond. Chapter 6. Stress, anxiety, and the fear of forgetting. Everything you're lying awake at 2 in the morning, mind racing. Did you respond to that email? What if your mother's health gets worse? How are you going to pay for your kids' college and your own retirement? What if you're already losing your memory and just don't realize it yet? This is the reality for millions of people in their 40s and 50s. The stress isn't occasional, it's constant. A low hum of worry that never fully turns off. Work deadlines, aging parents, kids who need help, financial pressure, health concerns. And underneath it all, the nagging fear that your brain is already starting to slip. That fear isn't irrational, but it's also feeding the very problem it's afraid of. Chronic stress is one of the most damaging forces your brain can face. We don't talk about acute stress of a deadline or an argument, but the kind that never resolves. The stress that keeps your cortisol levels elevated day after day, month after month, year after year. And for people in midlife, that kind of stress is almost universal. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone. In short bursts, it's useful. It sharpens focus, increases alertness, and mobilizes energy when you need it. But cortisol was designed for short-term threats, predators, emergencies, situations that resolve quickly. It was never meant to stay elevated for weeks or months at a time. When cortisol stays high, it stops being helpful and starts being toxic, especially to the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for forming new memories and retrieving old ones. The hippocampus is packed with cortisol receptors, which means it's particularly vulnerable to prolonged exposure. Research published in Neurology in 2018 found that people with higher cortisol levels in midlife had smaller brain volumes and performed worse on memory tests compared to those with average cortisol levels. Other studies have shown that prolonged cortisol exposure is associated with hippocampal shrinkage, which is strongly linked to memory loss and increased dementia risk. A study from the University of Chicago examined the connection between chronic stress and Alzheimer's disease, finding that cortisol actively shrinks the hippocampus over time. The very regions that are critical for memory, the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, are the first to suffer under relentless stress. And once those regions start shrinking, the brain's ability to form and retrieve memories declines. Animal studies show the same pattern. Rats exposed to chronic stress show cell damage in the hippocampus, impaired memory performance, and increased levels of beta amyloid, the toxic protein linked to Alzheimer's. When the stress is removed, some of the damage reverses, but prolonged stress causes permanent changes. A population-based study published in 2023 followed over 1,000 individuals from young adulthood through late midlife. The researchers found that higher perceived stress in midlife was significantly associated with greater cognitive decline, particularly in processing speed and overall IQ. The effect persisted even after controlling for education, early life circumstances, and personality traits like neuroticism. Another study from Finland found that midlife work-related stress was associated with poorer performance on global cognition and processing speed decades later. The stress people experienced in their 40s and 50s predicted how their brains functioned in their 70s. The mechanism isn't just about cortisol damaging the hippocampus directly. Chronic stress also drives inflammation, disrupts sleep, raises blood pressure, destabilizes blood sugar, and increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, all of which independently raise dementia risk. Stress doesn't just harm your brain. It harms the systems that keep your brain healthy. And for people in midlife, stress isn't just about external circumstances. It's often self-generated. The anxiety about the future, the worry about whether you're doing enough, earning enough, planning enough, the fear that you're already forgetting too much. That anxiety itself becomes a stressor. You forget where you put your phone, and your first thought is, "This is it. This is the beginning of the end." That thought triggers a stress response. Cortisol spikes. Your brain, already under strain, gets hit with another dose of the very chemical that's damaging it. The irony is brutal. The fear of losing your memory creates stress, and the stress accelerates the very decline you're afraid of. Breaking that cycle doesn't require becoming a Zen monk and meditating for an hour a day or retreating to a mountaintop. It requires recognizing when your stress response is running in the background, damaging your brain for no good reason, and learning to turn it down. Lower the baseline. Reduce the chronic hum of activation that keeps cortisol elevated and your nervous system stuck in overdrive. Most people know they're stressed. They just don't think there's anything they can do about it. The bills still need to be paid. The job still demands 60 hours a week. Stress feels inevitable, so why bother trying to manage it? Because even if you can't eliminate the stressors, you can change how your body responds to them. You can train your nervous system to downregulate faster, recover more completely, and spend less time stuck in fight or flight mode. The difference between someone whose brain is getting destroyed by chronic stress and someone whose brain is resilient despite stressful circumstances often comes down to recovery. How quickly do you return to baseline after a stressful event? How much time do you spend each day in a genuinely relaxed state? For most people in midlife, the answer is almost none. They wake up stressed, stay stressed all day, and go to bed stressed. Their cortisol levels never fully drop. Their nervous system never fully resets. And over years, that chronic activation wears down the brain. The good news is that even small interventions, short, simple practices that take 5 to 10 minutes, can significantly reduce cortisol and improve your brain's resilience. You don't need a yoga mat. You need techniques that work in real life, in the middle of a busy day, without requiring special equipment or an hour of free time. 5-minute breathing reset. This is the simplest, most effective tool for lowering cortisol quickly. When you slow your breathing and focus on exhaling fully, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which signals your body to relax. Sit down. Close your eyes if you can, but it's not required. Breathe in slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Hold for a count of 4. Exhale slowly through your nose or mouth for a count of 6 or 8. Repeat for 5 minutes. A study published in 2023 found that combining slow, deep breathing with aerobic exercise reduced cortisol levels by over 30% in stressed individuals. Even without the exercise, breathing alone significantly lowered cortisol. Another technique, called 4-7-8 breathing, works similarly. Inhale through your nose for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds. The extended exhale is what triggers the relaxation response. Do this for 3 to 5 minutes whenever you notice stress building. You can do this at your desk, in your car before a meeting, in the bathroom at work, anywhere. The key is doing it before the stress peaks, not after you're already in full panic mode. 3-minute attention anchor. Most stress comes from your mind racing ahead to things that haven't happened yet, or replaying things that already did. Your brain is everywhere except the present moment, which keeps your stress response activated even when there's no immediate threat. An attention anchor is a simple way to pull your mind back to the present. Pick one thing to focus on. Your breath, the sensation of your feet on the floor, the sounds around you. Focus on that one thing for 3 minutes. When your mind wanders, and it will, gently bring it back. This isn't meditation in the traditional sense. It's attention training. You're teaching your brain that it doesn't have to be constantly scanning for threats. 3 minutes, a few times a day, is enough to start lowering your baseline stress. 10-minute walk without your phone. Walking is one of the most effective stress reduction tools, but only if you're actually present while you're doing it. Walking while scrolling through news or checking emails defeats the purpose. Leave your phone behind or put it on silent in your pocket. Walk outside if possible. Pay attention to what you see, hear, and feel. Notice the temperature, the light, the sounds. Let your mind wander, but keep it anchored to the present, not to your to-do list. A 10-minute walk, done this way, lowers cortisol, improves mood, and gives your brain a genuine break from the constant activation of daily stress. Do it once a day, ideally in the middle of the day when stress tends to peak. Evening wind-down routine. Your stress response should be lowest at night. But for most people, it's still running. You're in bed, but your mind is reviewing the day, planning tomorrow, worrying about everything that could go wrong. Your body never gets the signal that it's safe to fully relax. An evening wind-down routine creates that signal. 20 to 30 minutes before bed, do something low stimulation and predictable. Read a book, not on a screen. Take a warm shower. Do some light stretching. Listen to calm music. Write in a journal. The content matters less than the consistency. When you do the same calming activities in the same order every night, your brain starts associating them with sleep and relaxation. Over time, the routine itself becomes a cue for your nervous system to downshift. Box breathing during high-stress moments. When you're in the middle of a stressful situation, a difficult conversation, a tense meeting, a moment of overwhelm, you need something you can do discreetly without drawing attention. Box breathing works. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Exhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Repeat 4 times. The symmetry is calming, and the focus required to count keeps your mind from spiraling. This won't eliminate the stressor, but it will stop your stress response from escalating. You'll stay calmer, think more clearly, and avoid saying or doing something you'll regret later. Micro pauses between tasks. Most people move from one task to the next without any transition. Finish a call, immediately open email. Finish a meeting, immediately start the next one. Your stress accumulates throughout the day because your nervous system never gets a chance to reset. Add micro pauses, 30 seconds to a minute between tasks. Close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths. Stretch, stand up, look out a window. Anything that interrupts the forward momentum and gives your brain a moment to recalibrate. These pauses don't take significant time, but they prevent stress from compounding. By the end of the day, you'll feel less drained and more capable of handling whatever comes next. When to get help. Sometimes stress isn't something you can manage on your own. If you're experiencing persistent anxiety, insomnia, frequent panic attacks, or depression, these techniques might help. But they're not enough. You need professional support. Therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, is highly effective for chronic stress and anxiety. Medication can also be helpful in some cases, especially for people dealing with clinical anxiety or depression. There's no shame in needing help. Chronic stress is damaging your brain. If self-management tools aren't working, getting professional help is one of the most protective things you can do. Stress isn't just an emotional problem. It's a biological one. Every day you spend with elevated cortisol is a day your brain is under attack. The hippocampus is shrinking, inflammation is rising, blood vessels are getting damaged, memory is getting harder. You can't eliminate stress entirely, but you can change how much time you spend in a stressed state versus a recovered state. You can train your nervous system to reset faster. 5 minutes of breathing, 3 minutes of focused attention, 10 minutes of walking, a consistent evening routine. These aren't luxuries. They're interventions. They lower cortisol. They protect your hippocampus. They give your brain a chance to recover. And recovery is what makes the difference. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to interrupt the cycle. Conclusion. You at 70 plus. Clear, free, alive. This isn't about perfection. It never was. You don't need to become a different person, someone who meditates for an hour, exercises twice a day, eats only organic vegetables, and never feels stressed. That version of brain health is a fantasy, and it's also unnecessary. The research is clear. Even partial adherence to a handful of healthy habits significantly reduces dementia risk. You don't need to do everything. You need to do enough, consistently enough, that your brain gets the support it requires to stay resilient as you age. Lifestyle interventions work. They work even when you start late. They work even if you have genetic risk, even if you don't follow the program perfectly. You don't need to overhaul your entire life overnight. You need to choose 2 or 3 habits, integrate them into your daily routine, and stick with them long enough that they become automatic. Then, when those habits are solid, you can add more if you want. What a brain-healthy day actually looks like. You wake up and get out of bed at roughly the same time you did yesterday. Consistency matters more than the exact hour. You slept 7 to 8 hours because you went to bed at a reasonable time the night before and didn't spend an hour scrolling on your phone. You start your day with 10 minutes outside, a walk around the block, sitting on your porch with coffee, standing in your yard. The sunlight hits your eyes and signals your brain that it's morning, which helps regulate your circadian rhythm and sets you up for better sleep tonight. Breakfast is simple. Oatmeal with berries and walnuts, Greek yogurt with fruit and a drizzle of honey, eggs with spinach and whole grain toast. Something that includes a brain portion, vegetables, fruit, healthy fats. Coffee or tea, no sugar. You move through your morning, work, errands, whatever your day requires. But you build in micro-pauses. Between tasks, you take 30 seconds to close your eyes and breathe. You stand up, stretch, look out the window. You don't let stress compound without interruption. At some point before noon, you move. A 20-minute walk at a pace that feels purposeful, like you're slightly late. Stairs instead of the elevator. A quick bodyweight workout at home, squats, push-ups, lunges. You're not training for a marathon. You're giving your brain the blood flow and neurochemical boost it needs to stay healthy. Lunch is built around vegetables. A large salad with protein. A wrap with greens and hummus. Leftovers from last night's dinner. You're not counting calories or obsessing over macros. You're just making sure most of your plate is real food, not processed junk. In the afternoon, you spend 15 to 20 minutes on a cognitive challenge. Practicing a language on an app. Working through a few pages of music practice. Reading something that requires focus. The activity doesn't need to be glamorous. It just needs to be slightly difficult. Something that makes your brain work. At some point, you have a real conversation. A phone call with a friend where you actually talk for 20 minutes. Coffee with a colleague where you discuss something meaningful. A video call with family. Quality matters more than quantity. You're not just exchanging information. You're connecting. Dinner happens at least 2 to 3 hours before bed. Fish or chicken with roasted vegetables and a side of rice or quinoa. Pasta with olive oil, garlic, and greens. A stir-fry with lots of vegetables and a small portion of noodles. Again, simple, accessible food, arranged in a way that supports your brain. In the evening, you wind down. You dim the lights. You put your phone on silent in another room. You read, stretch, take a warm shower, listen to music. You do something low stimulation that signals to your brain that sleep is coming. You go to bed at roughly the same time you did last night. You fall asleep within 20 minutes because you've trained your body to expect sleep at this time. You sleep deeply because you moved during the day, managed your stress, didn't eat too late, and gave your brain the conditions it needs to rest and repair. That's it. That's a brain-healthy day. It doesn't require perfection. It just requires structure. A handful of habits, repeated consistently, that give your brain what it needs to function well and resist damage. Right now, pick 2 or 3 habits from this book. Maybe it's walking 20 minutes a day and fixing your sleep schedule. Maybe it's cutting out sugary drinks and practicing 5 minutes of breathing before bed. Whatever you choose, write it down. Make it specific. Not exercise more. Instead, walk for 20 minutes every morning before work. Do those 2 or 3 things every day for the next month. Track them if it helps. Cross them off a list. Use an app. Whatever keeps you accountable. After a month, those habits will start feeling automatic. At that point, you can add another one if you want. Or you can just keep going with what you have. Either way, you're building cognitive reserve. You're lowering your dementia risk. You're protecting your brain. Every 3 months, reassess. Are the habits still working? Do they need adjustment? Are there other areas you want to address? Treat this like a living project, not a fixed plan. Your life will change. Your habits should adapt. Imagine yourself at 75, maybe 80. You're still sharp, still engaged, still learning, still connected to people who matter. You're not perfect. You've dealt with health issues, age, and loss. But your mind is still yours. You remember the people you love. You solve problems. You're not spending your days confused, frightened, or unable to recognize your own family. That version of you doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you made choices, small, boring, unglamorous choices, consistently, over years. That's the goal. Not to live forever. Just to reach old age with your mind intact, your memories preserved, your ability to think and connect and experience life still functional. You can't control everything. You can't eliminate genetic risk. But you can shift the odds dramatically in your favor. The brain you have at 70 depends on what you do today. So choose 2 habits. Start now. Stick with them. Your 75-year-old self will thank you.